Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions, deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another live broadcast of the Kev Baker Show right here on Truth Frequency Radio Network. You can find us at tfrlive.com, and of course we go out on iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live, wherever you're listening. I want to thank each and every one of you individually for turning up yet again. And I'm sure tonight is going to be yet another brilliant show, because for the past 3 or 4 weeks now, the shows have just been getting better and better. I don't know how we do it. We just throw it together, but somehow we just keep on raising the bar right here, and hope all of you out there are able to take the information that we're presenting, and it helps make things a little clearer as to what's going on in this crazy world. And as I've said right from the start, I don't tell you what to think. I just encourage you to think for yourselves. Don't accept what's coming from the mainstream, because we know they are liars. And tonight, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Mr. Anthony Patch. Johnny Whistles will be along in hour number 2. But for all you new listeners out there who don't know Mr. Patch, you can check out his work over at anthonypatch.com. He's got a number of books available there. You can get access to the Entangled magazine. You can also get access to the Full Spectrum Dominance Conference that we were a part of just recently. So without any further ado, let's waste no more time. Tony, how you doing, brother?
Very good, my friend. Thanks for having me back. And I don't think we'll be able to top Monday's show. What do you think?
I really, Monday's show was absolutely brilliant. And like I'd said at the introduction to that, you kind of teased us all on the Friday saying what was going to be coming up. And then Kathleen came in and she literally blew our minds. And I'm not just talking about me, because even the chat room were asking, how can you top Monday's show? We've got a lot to cover tonight, though, Tony. We're getting back into some of the current stuff that's going on in the world. And right now, it's been described as apocalyptic scenes that are coming out of California. We've got these fires that are raging, and this is where I want us to start tonight, because as you're going to go on to explain in a moment, I mean, you've had direct experience of this type of thing. And right now on the internet, there's a few conspiracy theories flying around as to the source of the problem when it comes to these fires. You sent me a video this morning. I checked that out. I got halfway through it, and the kind of, to break it down, I mean, I think there's people thinking that these fires may be the result of a directed energy weapon. And I would like to get your take on that, Tony. What do you think? I mean, is there some conspiracy here, or is this just something that happens?
The best way to answer that is to go and look at the evidence and check the facts. No directed energy weapons. Evidence doesn't support it. And my own personal hands-on experience in 1991, October 19th and 20th of October 1991, I was personally involved as a paramedic with American Medical Response, as a private paramedic, not as a firefighter, involved in the Oakland Hills firestorm. And we'll get into that a little bit, but I will tell you that from my personal experience in a firestorm, there are claims that the houses that are burned to the foundation, leaving foundations and chimneys and, stainless steel appliances, and that's it, are completely normal. There are no direct energy weapons involved here. And in fact, I'm going to give you the meteorological issue that has spurred the fires in particular in the Santa Rosa, the Northern California area, not far from the Oregon border. What they had were 40-mile-an-hour winds that were knocking down power lines because the trees were being pushed into the power lines, and this is what triggered the fire. It's super dry, really low humidity, lots of fuel on the ground. The winds were caused because they had what is known as a dry front. This is a front without any moisture to it that was blowing through and mixed with a cold front that came down from the north and in a circular fashion whipped up these 40-mile-an-hour winds that pushed the trees into the power lines and triggered the fires. Now, that scenario is pretty much what is being blamed or pinpointed for the cause of the fires, the etiology of or points of origin of the fires in Northern California, in addition to Santa Rosa. I'm going to wrap this up real quick. We will talk about the Oakland Hills firestorm, my personal account of that. But on another personal note, my own sister lives in Santa Rosa. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Pacific time yesterday, she and her husband were under mandatory evacuation. They left their home behind. They still don't know if there's been any damage to her home, but I'm following this on a very personal level at this point. But there are no directed energy weapons. There's nothing nefarious other than the fact that it's very dry. Go ahead.
And Tony, you sent me a link to a video today from a gentleman that you've been following on YouTube. I believe he's a pilot, a very common sense report on everything that's going on. And if people want to write down this name, they can check out the channel. I'll spell it because I've been trying to say it to myself in my mind. Maybe Tony can pronounce it better, but the YouTuber is called Blanco Lirio, and it's BLANCOLIRIO, and that's BLANCOLIRIO. You can find him over at YouTube, and that was a really good report I watched from him. He was explaining the kind of visual stuff that he's seen going on, and he was explaining about these dry fronts as well. And I urge people to maybe check that channel out to get the latest and all the news coming from a citizen journalist, basically. But it's a very good channel, that one, Tony, and I definitely recommend people check it out.
Yeah, I followed his reports early this year. Back in January, we were covering the Oroville Dam and the flooding and the what appeared to be the imminent breaching of the dam. And he lives right there by Oroville Dam, and he was covering that literally from the face of the dam itself. Excellent professional reporting. So I followed him since then, and he does fly for the fire service, and he does the fire retardant dropping missions and water drop missions, and so he knows what's going on and gives a good firsthand report. And folks, the reason we're talking about some of these things is because we've been seeing the hurricanes, obviously. We're also going to talk about the New Madrid fault line, a 100-mile stretch of the fault line that coincides with the Mississippi River, and the fact that the Mississippi River in that area is virtually bone dry following this winter. During the spring and the summer, there was major flooding that really wasn't covered by the mainstream media, but major flooding throughout that area. So the river drying up is not because of drought conditions, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Go ahead, sir.
And Tony, you were mentioning there during your time as a paramedic, I mean, you've had first-hand experience of what this hell is actually like. And I use that word hell because some of the images that I'm seeing, I struggle to actually describe them because I said apocalyptic at the start, and that's for lack of a better term. But what's it actually like when you're actually dealing with this stuff?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick visual. If you're driving through these fire lines, through the hills at night, and you look down into the canyons and the valleys where there used to be homes located amongst the trees in the folds of the hillsides, and all you see are glowing embers. It's like looking into the fireplace in your home when the logs have died down and they're just glowing embers. Everything else is black around it, and it is very surreal. Now, by way of giving you some of the background of my training, I went through the California State Fire Academy at Solano Community.
Mr. Patch, are you back with us, Tony?
I didn't know we lost you.
You're back. It's okay. We're back. It was just a slight interruption there. I thought we were getting our usual interruption that we usually have pre-show, but you're back with us live now. Carry on, brother.
Yeah, I went through the Firefighter Academy in California in the 80s and state certified as a firefighter 1. Never worked for a fire department. Didn't have a desire to. I did it for the cross training because I work with the firefighters so much. And because of that, when the Oakland Hills firestorm hit, I was a supervisor, a field supervisor, along with a number of other guys. And we decided, because we're not trained for this, we're not trained for a firestorm as paramedics, but fortunately I had the firefighter background. We decided amongst ourselves that we were going to not allow any of our other crew members to go up into the hills on any of the rescue missions that we were tasked for. So only supervisory personnel in 3 ambulances. We spent nearly 20 continuous hours in the hills in Oakland. We were the only ones driving through the streets with fully involved houses on both sides of us. No firefighters were seen. No police officers were seen. Our job was to go up and respond to 911 calls for people that were trapped in their homes and had no way to get out. So we were taking ambulances up through the fire lines. Again, houses on both sides, completely involved in fire. And I don't say this to be sensational. I'm just telling you that I have firsthand experience. So I understand what's going on in Santa Rosa and the other areas. But we were taking people down out of the hills in our ambulances who were not patients. The firefighters were staged at the advancing line of the fire that was marching down through the hills of Berkeley and Oakland, heading towards Berkeley predominantly. The fire appeared that it was going to be unchecked, despite all the firefighters at the front line. Firefighters from all over the Bay Area. We had them lined up down Ashby Avenue for miles. Bumper to bumper fire trucks staged. And our command post was at the Claremont Hotel in Berkeley, at the base of the fire line. The air tankers were flying at treetop level right over our heads and dropping water and retardant on the advancing line. The fire appeared that it was going to be unchecked, and it was going to repeat. I think it was in 1902. There was a fire in Berkeley that went all the way to the edge of the bay, all the way to the water line, and burned the city of Berkeley to the ground. This was the scenario we were anticipating. However, by about 3:30 in the afternoon, the prevailing winds, which at that point were blowing the fire down the hill towards the bay, they predictably did change. We weren't sure that the wind direction was going to change, but it did. And now the onshore breezes coming from the ocean, from the Pacific towards Berkeley, towards the hills, began to push the fire back upon its already burned out fuel sources. That's what turned it around. That's what saved Berkeley. It was not the efforts of the firefighters and the air tankers, because virtually they were in a no-win situation. This is what's known as an urban interface firestorm. This is where you have fuel sources. In this case, we had eucalyptus trees that are throughout the Berkeley and Oakland hills. These have a high oil content in them. They literally explode like dynamite. They become so superheated. This added to the conflagration. So I tell you all this because firestorms are not an everyday everyday occurrence, but they are a natural occurrence. This particular fire was the result of human error. There were some gentlemen that were cleaning up some debris, and they were burning when they should not have been burning, and they left it unsupervised. It was initially extinguished by the Berkeley Fire Department, but they failed to post a watch. The afternoon breezes came up, much like I just described. No one was watching, and it got out of control. The result was an Oakland police officer was killed trying to rescue people from the point of origin in the hills that were trapped in their vehicles. He was overrun by the fire and was killed. I personally had to deal with his charred remains. The next fatality I dealt with was with a fire battalion chief who was electrocuted when power lines dropped onto his vehicle as he was examining a map he had spread over the hood of the vehicle. Likewise, I took care of that gentleman. So I don't say any of that to sound like I'm somebody special. That's just the job. But you get called into situations that you've never been trained for. Even my firefighter academy training did not train me for a firestorm. But you do what you can, and I pray for the residents there, and I pray for the firefighters, paramedics, and police officers that are all involved with this. But they are stretched so thin right now. This is virtually a firestorm situation that they are confronting in Northern California. Thanks for letting me tell that story, Kev.
No, absolutely. Maybe you could clear this up, because Jeanette in the chat room, this might be something that people have heard out there on the internet, that the chemicals that they drop on these fires, Tony, some people might be thinking they're actually an accelerant, but surely that isn't the case, right?
No, it's called a fire retardant for an obvious reason. It is a mix of, now this is kind of dating, it may be different now, but in my experience, it had been boron, which is basically a salt type material from the deserts, boron mixed with fertilizer so that there can be a replanting that would take place in the forest fire situations. Now, in a urban interface fire like this, the retardant probably is not including any type of fertilizer material because they're not concerned about replanting after the fire. I would say that it's probably more a mixture of the red boron, borax type material. Someone out there can Google it and find out exactly what it is. But no, this is a retardant, and it's very effective. It's also pretty messy when it gets on you, but yeah. And then the other part, of course, is if they have the water supply available, such as a river, lake, even, the bays, then they will drop water. In the Oakland Hills fire, I watched helicopters that were dipping their buckets into the East Bay Regional Parks district lakes, and that includes Tilden Park. And in a couple of cases, I watched them actually dip into large commercial or public swimming pools to extract water for this. There's a big story behind that. There was a big problem with Oakland Fire Department's dispatch center and their leadership, but I won't digress into that.
And these firefighters, the paramedics, anyone dealing with this kind of crisis, this emergency, I take my hats off to them. I really, really do. And there's a few jobs in this world that I think that they just can't pay enough money to these men and women who are doing these tasks. And firefighting is certainly one of these jobs. So a big shout out to anyone out there who is involved in this. If you know anyone out there, let's hope everyone is okay. And we'll certainly keep an eye on this to see what happens. But hopefully, just hopefully, fingers crossed, this will come to an end very soon. Now, Tony, we've got about 5-6 minutes left before we go to the break, and we're going to stick on the kind of weather stuff here, or natural kind of geology, geography. And you were mentioning this New Madrid fault line. And the New Madrid is something that I came across early in my days of researching and things like that. All the horror stories of how it would cut the US in half. And now you're telling me that is it a 100-meter stretch of river is just disappearing?
That's 100 miles.
100 miles, sorry.
Yeah. And there have been numerous earthquakes right around the 3 range, up and down both sides of the Mississippi River, where this fault line also runs. And the issue now, as many people may know, is the Mississippi River in the area of this 100-mile long fault line is virtually bone dry. And in some of the areas, they're trying to dredge 24 hours a day now to get the river traffic flowing again, because the barges, including grain and fuel barges, can't make it up and down the Mississippi. And this really has a huge, not just local, but national impact and even international impact in commodity trades, including gasoline products. So the question is, where's the water going?
And like I was saying to you, Tony, I mean, there's been earthquakes around there. And to me, I'm no geologist, anything like that, but it sounds to me like there might be some kind of chasm or something opening up down below, and that in itself could be something to watch, right?
Yeah. Because there were, as I said earlier, there were no drought conditions that precipitated this loss of water from the river. And there really hasn't been any good reporting on this in terms of explaining it. And I agree with you. I'm just going to say I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence. I think if this is coinciding with a fault line, the New Madrid fault line, then it does appear that there's been some tectonic separation, some gaps that perhaps have occurred. We don't have any reports of sinkholes taking place, but there may be gaps that they'll be able to identify in the dry riverbed now and be able to determine where the water has gone to. But this is pretty ominous because that amount of water itself weighs quite a bit. So you have two effects here. One, water weighs about 8 pounds to the gallon. Okay, a gallon of water, U.S. gallon of water, weighs about 8.8 pounds. So that's quite a bit of weight that you're relieving from the riverbed itself. Now that can cause an upheaval of the ground because you're removing the weight. Now that can trigger an earthquake. But the water that is going down into the ground, if that's the scenario, I mean, where's it going to go? Gravity's going to take it underground. If it's filling dry aquifers, it wouldn't have too much of an effect because it would spread out the weight. But if the aquifers are already full because we had months and months of deluge and flooding taking place, the aquifers can't absorb that water. So where's it going? It must be going to new cracks in the ground, new cracks in the mantle itself. Now, how deep it runs, I don't know, but that can cause a shifting just because of its weight. If it's concentrated enough in specific pockets underground, that could trigger an earthquake, I would expect.
Yeah, it's almost like, I mean, for lack of a better term, again, like a rebound effect. It's used to having all that weight on it, and then that's displaced. And then obviously there's going to be some kind of reaction by the surface itself as well. And I'm seeing in the chat room, Phyllis is one that's bringing this up, and this is something I've always kind of speculated about in the past, Tony, and we're going into speculation here, but how about something that's referred to as an expanding Earth event?
Yeah, we've related that to the discussion in the past about strangelets at the core of the planet, strangelets produced by the Large Hadron Collider at CERN and also in smaller quantities at Brookhaven National Laboratories with the Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider. Is this evidence of the tectonic pulling apart, the separation because of the expansion of the planet, the diameter, the expansion of the crust? I do believe that is occurring. I think that there is more earthquake activity due to the separation of the plates as opposed to what is still continuing, but I think in a reduced fashion, which is the subduction of the plates, one plate diving under the other. So I think that we're seeing some precursors, and I don't want to be pointing fear or anything, but if you lose this much water along the 100-mile stretch of the Mississippi River. And we've seen because of drought that this happens, but there's no drought causing this. Then there's only one explanation, and that's a separation of the tectonic plates.
Now, there's a YouTuber covering this, and I believe he's called Mr. B, is it? Or Mr. M? Or Mr.
M double B 333.
Now, that's the person or the YouTube channel to be watching on this, because Tony was telling me that there's not many people covering this at all. I've seen in the chat room somebody saying, why are we not hearing about this? And I would urge people to check out that channel for further information on that. And we're almost on the break. There it is. Join us in 3 short moments. Myself and Mr. Patch will be back. Don't go in.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
And we are back. We are live. Moving into the second part of tonight's live broadcast of the Kev Baker Show right here on TFRlive.com. I've got Anthony Patch with me. Johnny Whistles will be along in hour number 2. We were talking about the Californian fires and earth changes during the first segment of the show. We were calling on some of Tony's direct first-hand experience of being in the middle of that kind of hell. And now we're going to shift gears into something myself and Mr. Patch, this show and his own show, are becoming quite renowned for. We're going to be talking about AI. And I came across a story today. It was on Russia Today. And the headline reads that Alibaba to spend $15 billion, I'll repeat that, $15 billion on new global research program. And I'll just read the first bit here, Tony, and we'll get into it. It says, Chinese e-trading giant Alibaba is to invest more than $15 billion over the next 3 years in research and development into artificial intelligence and security technologies. The program is to be called Alibaba DAMO, and that's Alibaba DAMO Academy, which stands for Discovery, Adventure, Momentum, and Outlook. The corporation plans to open several research labs in China, the US, Russia, Israel, and Singapore. And it goes on to quote a representative from Alibaba saying, the labs will focus on foundational and disruptive technology research, including data intelligence, Internet of Things, fintech, quantum computing, and human-machine interaction. The company also plans to hire 100 talented researchers from around the world to staff these labs, which will reportedly closely collaborate with university programs at Berkeley of the University of California. And quoting a gentleman called Jeff Zhang, it says, we are now looking for talented and driven researchers to join us in everyday lives, to join us in the quest for new disruptive technologies that would advance our everyday lives, benefit small businesses, and narrow the technology gap to make our world a more inclusive place. The program will be guided by an advisory board of researchers and educators from several top universities. DAMO Academy's current advisory board also include professors from Princeton, Harvard, MIT, and the University of Washington, Columbia University, Beijing Institute of Technology, Peking University, and Zhejiang University. Probably butchered that pronunciation. But to finish the article, it says here that the Academy is the first major global initiative to focus on developing the global technological capabilities and infrastructure that will enable Alibaba to fulfill its commitment to serve 2 billion customers and create 100 million job opportunities in the next 20 years. Alibaba currently employs 25,000 engineers and scientists. Now, Tony, we were kind of just hinting at this before we came back from the break, but this is another example of how the mainstream media tell the world that we're at loggerheads with the likes of Russia, China, they're the big emerging kind of enemies. Yet when it comes to science and projects like the ISS and now artificial intelligence, like we're finding out here, there's something else going on because they're all collaborating together in a global program. So what's your thoughts on this one, Tony? Bearing in mind that they're going to be working very closely at Berkeley University of California.
Yeah, my old stomping grounds. And we've talked about Berkeley and particle accelerators. And Alibaba, wasn't it 7 thieves? Or 1,000 thieves? How many thieves?
Lots of thieves.
Lots of thieves in that story. Somebody in chat can give me the number. But that has to do with Sesame, Open Sesame. There is a particle collider in Jordan, just opened this year, called Sesame. I like to throw those out there just to stimulate a little bit of thought. But, you know, Kev, what our methodology is that we employ is to look at the science and see what's going on in the world. And as you said, at the university level, everybody's buddies and friends, and it's open platforms and open sharing of knowledge and papers and research. And yet, when you get to the Joe Bag of Donuts level with politics and the mainstream propaganda, you don't hear about any of this cooperation. All you see at the Joe Bag of Donuts level is we're about to go to war with North Korea because Trump just said we're going to tenfold increase the production of nuclear weapons, nuclear warheads. Well, that's a great solution. Not that we don't have enough of them already. You know, my background from working in nuclear surety in the U.S. Army, even in those days, 77, 78, 79, 1980, we had enough nuclear warheads to kill ourselves just on the U.S. side, in our bunkers, so to speak. In the arsenal of the U.S., we could blow up the world 100 times over. So what do we need more nukes for? It's just to feed the military-industrial complex. That's all it is. But again, I want to reiterate, what Kev and I do is to show you what's really going on in the world when it comes to science. And we do talk about the spiritual side as we did on Monday. We can take you behind the scenes and show you the mechanisms that are at work and the cooperation between nation states, because truly those that are orchestrating things in this planet do not view the sovereignty of nations as being valid. There are no sovereign nations anymore. It's already a one world government. It's just that Joe Bag of Donuts doesn't realize it yet because the mainstream propaganda hasn't told them. Go ahead, sir.
And you know, China, they really are emerging as one of the front runners when it comes to this whole AI, and in particular, the quantum communications kind of side of things, Tony. And you were even informing me that they're opening offices, I believe it's Alibaba, right next to Amazon and places like that, right?
Yes, and Microsoft. They've opened a new office that came out just a few days ago, predating this particular article you're citing, that they had opened up this new office in Seattle. So, everybody's buddies. And, you know, we talked about Amazon, that their business model, their open public business model is to sell you everything. So a couple of days ago, they announced, we're getting into the pharmaceutical sales business. We're going to sell online drugs.
Online drugs from Amazon? What is that all about?
So, I mean, these guys are all in bed together. Another piece to it. We've talked about D-Wave, okay? And I will continue to talk about D-Wave, folks, because this was shown to me before this became something that was even published in the science magazines. D-Wave was shown to me in early 2010, and I published my first book in 2013. I've been researching these guys since they put together their first prototypes, years before they sold their first model, the 128. So D-Wave plays a significant role. I hope you don't get bored hearing about it, but this is the mechanism by which they get their information. and I won't go down the rabbit hole and be too repetitive, but we're about to get into mind control, and it does involve D-Wave. So I'm just setting it up for you. But the point here is Amazon, in cooperation, in investing with Google, Amazon also has a D-Wave computer. Okay, they're partners with Google. And we said earlier this year, in February, Kevin and I broke the story that Volkswagen, as well as Temporal Defense Systems, were announced by D-Wave as having purchased the latest model, which was the 2000Q. That's a 2048 qubit set. Well, of course, all the existing customers, NSA included, all received their upgrades to the same level. So everybody has a 2000 model, 2000Q, not just the latest customers that were announced. What I'm getting at, folks, is we're going to talk about D-Wave and mind control from an article that I published in the October issue of Entangled magazine, available at anthonypatch.com. Okay, go ahead, Kev.
Well, I just want to backtrack a little there, because for some of the listeners, I mentioned something there called fintech or fintech, and to define that, like we like to do on this show, because it was actually a new term on me when I came across it today. Fintech companies are businesses that actually leverage new technologies to create new and better financial services for both customers and businesses. It includes companies of all kinds that may operate in personal financial management, insurance, payment, asset management, etc. And on a kind of side note, get this, Tony, listeners, because this bit of information came from a webinar that was presented by a company called Morningstar Inc. Now, isn't Morningstar Lucifer? Isn't
yes.
There you go, Tony.
Yes, it is. Now repeat the name, the term for the financial part of that. F-I-N.
Yep. Fintech.
Right. Fintech. Now, that's a new word for the audience, I'm sure. But I want you to write that down. Fintech. This is financial technology. This is mark of the beast system. This is one world government economics. Okay? Fintech. This is what the Chinese are involved with Alibaba. This is what Amazon is involved with. Now, I'm going to take you back to the origins of D-Wave. When they were building their first chipsets, and they were trying to prove whether or not they had a viable system. I've told you at length about their work in terms of, as I would colloquially say, break the algorithm, Peter Shor's algorithm, 2048, and then a little later, the 4096 algorithm. When they were able to find each of the prime factors in those two long algorithms, they knew that the system was working. One of the other benchmarks, along with Peter Shor's algorithms, was their ability to predict the markets, be it stocks, commodities. They were successful. In fact, to the point of this scenario, the D-Waves operate so quickly that they could actually interrupt a trade that was placed in electronic trading, interrupt the flow of those electrons of that trade, that signal, analyze the position of that put or call that was placed in the market, and then take advantage of that position by then placing their own ahead of the streaming of that order, a put or a call. They were able to place their own strategic trade ahead of that one so as to beat it to the marketplace and thus profit from it. Now, they alleged, and this was open information, public information, they alleged that they did not pursue that for the purpose of profiting from it. Well, I'm here to tell you, folks, that this is how the black budget is supported. Okay, it's interruption of trades. People always hear about electronic trading and the manipulation of it. The simplest explanation I can give you of that is what I just gave you. It's interruption of trade and taking an advantage position, thereby profiting from it. It's pretty straightforward. And when you have a quantum computer and it's examining information that is traveling through transistor systems, you can always be well ahead of the speed of the transistor computer-based systems, those servers, in the electronic trading, because they don't stand a chance against the speed of a quantum computer. Go ahead, sir.
Absolutely. And, one world government, one cornerstone of that is going to be a one world currency. And when you see China talking about the fact that they're going to be working on this kind of thing, as I referred to from that Alibaba article, you really need to keep an eye on this, because be it the dollar or the pound over here in the UK, backed by absolutely nothing. And Tony, it's highly speculative, but I've always kind of considered China and their currency, that might be the one that we go to if it is a one world currency. Or of course, there's that thing called the Phoenix that we've heard about in the past. They may come up with something completely new, but China are certainly at the forefront of all of this. And if we're hearing about this information, just imagine what kind of stuff that they aren't disclosing yet, Tony. The stuff that's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, definitely. And China's been letting out information about their quantum entanglement form of communications between the Earth from the ground and satellites, and also transmitting in quantum entangled communications encrypted information through seawater. So, they're right in there. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't have evidence to this, but there's no doubt in my mind that D-Wave and the Chinese are in full cooperation. And this is, all playing into the Sentient World Simulation that we've discussed at length. We should get into the brain hacking here. It's pretty detailed, folks, but Kev, go ahead and wrap up your thoughts.
No, absolutely. And, when it comes to China, it's almost as if they've given up the quest to build their own kind of quantum computer, and they've left that to D-Wave. And now we're seeing how there's close relationships between China, Alibaba, and companies that own D-Waves. And isn't it interesting then, like Tony says, that they're working more on the application side of things, the quantum communications, the quantum networks that will, at the heart of it, have the D-Wave system. When you look at Chinese technology, they often refer to that kind of Beijing Institute of Technology or the Tianjin supercomputer kind of place like that. And that's as far as you ever really see them going, these supercomputers. And I think a deal's been done, basically, Tony, that D-Wave is going to be the system. Much like when you use a desktop computer, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find Windows on there. Microsoft, synonymous with desktops. D-Wave are the quantum company.
Well, I think the smoking gun here is what you just laid out, Kevin. That is that if the information coming out of China in the public sector is all about communication systems and networking, and specifically quantum entangled encrypted forms of communication, then you cannot operate a quantum entangled system unless you're employing a computer system to control it based on quantum entanglement. That's exactly what D-Wave is doing. They're operating quantum entangled qubits. Now, you don't do that with transistors. You cannot achieve quantum entanglement with the Model T transistor system. So all of this talk of their transistor-based supercomputers is all well and good, but they're still Model T technology in comparison to even the 128 qubit computer by D-Wave. But the D-Wave, as I broke the news a couple of weeks ago, they have 16 models. And the number of qubits has run from 128 at the first one, now to the 16th model, which is all part of geomancy. 16 fields in geomancy. You have 4,194,304 qubits. That's 4194304. That's equivalent to 57,000 344 billion. Okay, that would be out into the quadrillions, but 57,344 billion human brains. That's not even a number we can comprehend, but that's the equivalency based upon Gordy Rose's own statement that the third model, comprised of 512 qubits, was equivalent to 7 billion human brains. All you have to do is do the simple math. So we're going to lead into brain hacking that has to do with D-Wave, but go ahead, sir.
No, I mean, I think we should use Geordie's own term. It's a mind-boggling number. Now, he was referring to dimensions at the time, but when you get into the realms of 57 quadrillion brains, how many of us can even picture that number? It's totally off the charts. And I'm glad we're going into this brain hacking side of things, Tony, because it's synchronicity. Last night I was joined by Dr. Eric Karlstrom. What a groundbreaking show that was. I absolutely have so much love and respect for the doc, for what he's doing, for the information he's putting out there about targeted individuals, gang stalking, stuff like that. And a major cornerstone of all of that is obviously mind control. And we've all heard of MK Ultra back in the day. Documents have been declassified. But now we're moving into a time, and we're living in a time right now where this mind control, they're doing it on an individual level, and they're able to manipulate us electronically. And Tony, you've published an article on this, and you've entitled it Brain Hacking. I'll read out the first kind of paragraph of this for the listeners, because it says here that the term mind control typically conjures up images of persons of interest, otherwise colloquially referred to as targeted individuals, as exhibiting aberrant behaviour. Additionally, the implanting of false memories, even erasing, also comes to mind. And of course, when you're talking about implanting false memories, you can commonly refer to that, or one good example would be the Mandela effects that we've all been experiencing, and we've talked about ad nauseum on the show. New Mandelas always turning up all the time, and we've discovered by research that the best way to explain that is the implanting of false memories. And Tony, you've wrote a brilliant article about how that actually is implemented.
Yeah, the October issue follows some previous articles from June all the way through to October in Entangled magazine. You can subscribe to at anthonypatch.com. And I've built the case, and this is the latest presentation of evidence that I've done on how does mind control actually happen physiologically and technologically. And we're about to go to break, but I'm going to tell you, we're going to go into the very deep details here that have to do with 5G, D-Wave, and the physiological effects and the systems that are affecting the physiology of the human brain. We're going to take you right down to the quantum level. We've talked before about the spin of particles in the human brain being manipulated. But I know from feedback I've received from people that they wanted to get even more specific about how mind control works. And so I coined this and put together this article that really is based on hardcore research. I have links in there right from the universities as to how this is done. And what I've done in the article is to translate that, as I always do, into hopefully a little bit better understandable and comprehensible words and phrases. It's still pretty technical, so I just warn folks, but we're going to get into it because there is a segment of the audience that appreciates the deep details. Go ahead, sir.
Absolutely. And, because we've only got a few moments left, Tony, I mean, we actually experienced our own little Mandela effect the other day because we brought up Jim Carrey and his tetrahedrons and the kind of crisis that he's going through right now. And me personally, I remember his surname spelt C-A-R-R-E-Y. I think Johnny remembers it as C-A-R-E-Y. You remember it that way as well. So how can that possibly happen? How can it be that we share different memories of the same thing, yet both of us believe we're right? And this is exactly where this manipulation down to the quantum spin of particles come in, because it's that quantum spin, that's what leads to thoughts and memories. And if you can manipulate people at that level, well, that's what causes these kind of conflicts to turn up, Tony, isn't it?
It is. And what we need to keep in mind, we go to the break here real quick. This is a distribution system. We're talking about targeting individuals that are already targeted within the Sentient World Simulation. And a paper that came out in 2006, Purdue University, peer-reviewed white paper, 2007, Sentient World Simulation, driven by D-Wave quantum computers, went live. Every person's represented as a node and given an avatar. Every single person through this system of distribution can be individually, based upon their psychological profile and their behavior algorithm, they can be targeted and manipulated. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about why is it that Kev Baker sees it differently than I do when we're all caught up in the SWS.
You see, myself and Tony and Mr. Whistles after the break, we really have put a new spin on mind control, Tony.
Oh, you're a turkey.
I love playing with words. I really do. They might be spells, but I tell you what, you can have some fun playing some alphabet fun and games when it comes to these puns that I love to throw out.
Nobody else is going to play with you.
Well, this is very true. But after the break, we'll be joined by Johnny Whistles. He's in the chat room. You can find him over at tfrlive.com/chat. Find Anthony's work at anthonypatch.com. Find me every
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. Moving into hour number 2 already on tonight's live Kev Baker Show, right here on the only network that counts, in my opinion, www.tfrlive.com. We are Truth Frequency Radio, and there's not many stations like us out there. And I tell you what, there's not many guys that I know that's like the next person you're going to hear. He is, of course, Johnny Whistles. And Johnny, you know, last night I got so into the information with Doc Karlstrom, I forgot to point out a really big milestone. Last night was episode number 800. That's right, 800 of the Kev Baker Show. Can you believe it, brother? 800 episodes in, still going strong, still growing. And maybe it's just me personally, but I think the show's getting better every single night. And of course, Johnny, you have been such an important part of that. Might be my name on the door, but yourself and more recently, Anthony Patch. We've had Nano Girl with us as well. I want to thank you, brother, for being with me throughout this madness. And like the theme song there has said as we came back from the break, bringing the New World Order down. You know, we might not do it personally, individually, but this network and the information that we're putting out to thousands of people, that has to go a long way. Maybe not to bringing them down, but as the doc was saying last night, knowledge is power. 800 in, John. How does it feel?
Can't believe that, Kev. 800 now, it's incredible, really. It's a fantastic number. I can't actually believe that you kept me this long, Kev, to be honest with you. But
Johnny, even if I did fall out with you for some random reason that I can't even think of because we're like two peas in a pod,
yeah,
you absolutely knew. You know I'd get lynched in the street if I got rid of you, right?
I don't think it would be that bad, but I tell you, I've enjoyed every single minute of it, Kev. The 800 episodes, honestly, that is fantastic.
Johnny, you're just a people person. My mum spent about 10 minutes in your company, absolutely fell in love with you. And I think all the listeners out there, whatever it is you have, Johnny, you've got kind of magic to you, man. You really do. You're like a magnet. You draw people to you. And you give the kind of listeners a personal touch. So not so many of the listeners, but Gabby's one of them. You've been out for coffee with her and her husband. You've met a few of the other listeners, and you really do provide something that not many shows out there probably do. I mean, I've written to hosts in the past, emails, things like that. And you know what a buzz it used to be when you just used to get maybe a one-word reply or something like that. But there you are, man. You're going out there, you're meeting people, and you know the connections we've made, John. All this truth, all this kind of research, it brought us together 800 episodes ago on that 2013 Bilderberg trip. And think of all the great people you've met along the way. And think of all the people that you've empowered, John. All the people that you've woke up along the way as well. Nobody can take that away from you, man.
Thanks very much, Kev. Honestly, it has been amazing to think 800 episodes. Wow, it's an incredible number. But as you says, we've had met many friends out of this as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, see, as you're saying, we're going out for coffee with Gabby, with Lichty Lass, and do you know what I mean? And meeting amazing people. Big Ben, when he come up here to stay. Honestly, the list is endless, and it's thanks a lot, mate, for keeping me going along with it.
And you kept me going as well. And here's to the next 800. And you must remember back in the day when I said to you, John, I've done it. I've found us an expert on CERN. Remember, we used to try and make sense of what was going on over in Geneva. And of course, that led us to Anthony Patch, who I found speaking over on the Clyde Lewis show. A big shout out to Clyde for introducing Anthony to all of this. And Tony himself has become such a big part of this show. I co-host for him on a Friday. And it's Mr. Patch we're going back to right now. We're going to be getting into all things mind control, but before we get there, Tony, 800 episodes. I mean, I struggle to think how I've even managed this.
Well, I don't think there's anyone that can hold a candle to you in the alternative media realm to put on 800 broadcasts. That represents a broad spectrum of people that you've had on as guests, broad spectrum of research that you've been able to present through your guests. And it is a body of work, a body of research and knowledge that I think is unparalleled in this realm of the alternative media. So I congratulate you, but you missed out on an opportunity to title your show last night, The Ogdode. Do you know what I mean?
I do. It was you that taught me about the Ogdode in some of your earlier work over on YouTube and stuff like that. And isn't that the eight kind of, didn't we come across this Ogdode to start with like the eight godheads or something?
It is, and it's represented by the egg. And the egg shape is the birthing of the new race of beings. And our eclipse that we just had in the United States was egg-shaped. It was the Ogdode, August 21st eclipse. So there's some stuff going on here, my friend, and maybe you just kind of tied it together with your 800th show last night, the Ogdode show.
And, you know, before we move into your article, I obviously have to give a massive thanks to Chris and Cherie Geo for giving me this opportunity in the first place. And I remember changing my Skype status to living the dream right back before I done that first show. I've never changed it since because I'm still living the dream and, you know, just putting information out there for people in the chat and all the listening audience. This is what it's all about. And it's thanks to you, all of you out there, that I'm still here, because it'd be easy enough if I got it wrong, and I have got it wrong in the past, I'll admit that you could complain to the network and I'd be gone quicker than you know what. But I'm still here, and I'm here for all of you, as is Johnny, as is Tony. And we really are getting into some kind of really heavy information. But as Tony says, so much of our audience, they love us getting into the technical side of things, Tony. I used to worry at the start we maybe went too deep, too technical, too geeky. But no, the emails prove otherwise. And the next thing we're going into, like we were explaining there before the break, is this mind hacking. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can lay out what you've put in this brilliant article.
Well, thank you. We just before the break, we're sort of talking about this SWS and Mandela effect and targeting of individuals. And that's what we're going to get into. And so the question is, how can one person see something different from the other person that might be of the same age and live in the same social area? How can they see things differently? Well, it comes down to being a literal target. You are targeted. Of D-Wave and its building of its programming, that they utilize the algorithms that are built through the observation of human behavior. And this feeds into the recursive neural network and Boltzmann machine, deep machine learning scenario. The machine learns by observing humans and what they do. Well, from those algorithms that describe a individual person's personality profile, their behavior, they are able to then target that individual pretty much any way they choose to. Now, a little sidebar, we might get into this. I don't know, Kev, I'll leave it up to you and Johnny, but targeted individual, carry that over to the Las Vegas shooter, who has been labeled as the Oswald scenario. But we won't divert into that. I'll let the audience think about that as we delve into this technical aspects of mind control. But we are being individually targeted within the greater scheme of the Sentient World Simulation. Therefore, I might see Jim Carrey's name spelled with one R, while you might see it spelled with two R's. But that's all because we are implanted with certain information through this system that has literally quadrillions now of qubits in their system. So if you need something in the way of proof that this is even feasible to target 7 billion people individually, look at the Purdue paper that says that we are given an avatar. We are individually labeled, every person. And therefore, every person is subject to manipulation within this sentient world simulation. This gives you a glimpse into the capabilities of these quantum computers. Now, I said that there are 16 models. That's based upon the system of geomancy that is employed as the foundation to building quantum computers. And we spent a lot of time talking about that, and there's another great article in the October issue of Entangled magazine at anthonypatch.com that was authored by Kathleen Urquhart. And she was our guest on Monday and really laid it out. There's a lot more to that story, my friends, in terms of evidence of geomancy being the core foundation. But think about this world that we operate in. We operate in a world now that is based upon the binary system. Therefore, D-Wave, as one example of the binary system, they advanced the number of qubits from the first to the 16th model by the power of 2. And that's how they advance from the 128, 256, 512, 1024, and so forth and so on. It is all based on binary, which is what the geomancy system is based upon. Our world is run by a system based upon geomancy. That reaches back to the foundations of our history as human beings. It has always been and still is a binary world. So that's what they use with our modern technology of quantum computers based on a binary system of qubits and programming, and also the 5G system, which is also based upon a binary system that works lockstep with the number of qubits in the D-Wave computer. Again, my article lays this out. I've got a chart that shows all of the G numbers, 4G, 5G. I'll give you an example. 5G is equivalent to 256 qubits. That's only in the Model 2 of 16 qubits. And it's equivalent to 3.5 billion human brains. But the 5G system is a system that transmits the information. And as I get into this deeper for you, the magnetothermal stimulation system. That's at the heart of how they manipulate our brains, specifically the spin of the quantum particles that make up our brains. It is through magnetothermal stimulation. Now, I have the links to the white papers coming out of University at Buffalo College of Arts and Sciences, and another one out of the State University of New York at Buffalo. 2 links to 2 articles, white papers, peer-reviewed, and I'm going to lay out the translation to that. But Kev, go ahead and jump in, or Johnny, if you have some initial thoughts, and then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this.
No, I mean, definitely. And you mentioned 5G there. And if you're reading the kind of mainstream publications, you'll see them kind of talking about 5G in a future tense. Forget that. 5G is already here. They talk about the rollout of 5G. Yeah, I'm sitting right next to a router that's got a 5G channel on it. And the thing about 5G is this millimeter wave. And I honestly believe, and I refer to this, it's just my take on it, that 5G is almost like a directed energy weapon. It is a tool of control, and it's essential, absolutely essential to this whole system that they're building here. Or sorry, that they've already built. How do I know they've built it? Mandela effects. They're absolutely everywhere. They're manipulating us on individual and group levels, and all of that being done so that they can model it. It's all about models. It's all about data, going back into that Sentient World Simulation. And 5G is a massive, massive arm of that system. And Tony, I'll come back to you now because I really want you to lay this out for the listeners, because like last night, this is imperative that people really get to know this. And you've done writing on it, and I'm going to be publishing an article in the next edition of Entangled. I'm going to be concentrating more on the AI side of things, but really, really keen for people to know as much about this as they possibly can, because it might sound repetitive, but knowledge is power.
And I don't think you're going to find the knowledge I'm going to lay out for people really in any other outlet in the alternative media, because you and I really spend a lot of time doing the deep research that's required. So with that said, we're talking magnetothermal stimulation, directly correlated research employing magnetic fields to stimulate the human brain. Recently was published in August of 2017, University of Buffalo, the State University of New York. So I'm going to give you my translation of these 2 peer-reviewed papers. Taken together and introducing specially built DNA nanoparticles and strands into test subjects, control over their brains was achieved employing alternating magnetic fields, targeting neurons to fire on command. Now, as I'm reading this, folks, go ahead and overlay what I'm reading to you with the shooter, the Patsy in Las Vegas. Okay? So I'm going to read it again, and we're going to go right into it. Taken together, introducing specially built DNA nanoparticles and strands into test subjects. Control over their brains was achieved employing alternating magnetic fields, targeting neurons to fire on command. Specific motor functions directly came under this method of control. Motor functions, okay? Arms, legs, moving the body. Okay, not just manipulating the mind, but controlling the movements of the body. This is all done remotely. Corresponding to this technique entails the application of magnetothermal genetic stimulation, allowing for the precise activation of deep brain circuits without the need for surgical implantation of any device. Okay, this is genetic modification and stimulation we're talking about, folks. This is a remote process. The 5G millimeter wave systems are fully capable of transmitting such magnetothermal signals, literally from thousands of molecule-sized antennas deployed throughout any environment, even our homes and places of business. Within the range of 5G signals processing are several forms of its modulation. most commonly found in cell phone and television signal transmissions, is the Wi-Fi quadrature amplitude modulation system. That is called QAM. Now, the chart I have in this article lays out qubits from D-Wave, QAM of 5G, parallel dimensions, and equivalent numbers of brains, and the 16 models and the G rating corresponding to each model of D-Wave computer. The following provides an overview and contextual framing of this system. With rollout of the artificially intelligent Sentient World Simulation, each of the 7 billion plus individuals on this planet are represented by a node and given an avatar. This entails detailed algorithms profiling, predicting their patterns of behavior, thus constituting a singular system of worldwide control. While it is difficult for the human mind to conceptualize the scope, scale, and depth of this digital simulation, its attendant computing system here is broken down into relevant numbers. So I'll skip past all of that I've already said to you. Now, given this overview of the internal components and workings of these adiabatic quantum computers, those are D-Wave's computers, folks, adiabatic, a further explanation of the Mandela effect can be undertaken. As each person has been rendered as an amalgamation of algorithms within the simulation, mathematical manipulations of each person or node are instituted by this artificially intelligent worldwide system. Literally, individuals and groups are targeted by varying levels of augmented AI housed within a network of 16 models of adiabatic quantum computers. With multiple copies of each having been produced and sold to governments and private industry, their numbers exceed those of the individual models themselves. Low-level examples of the prowess of AI have become nearly common knowledge. For example, board and computer gaming competitions between humans and machines. Again, quite literally, these are for human consumption. These exercises serving both to provide deep machine learning data to these recurrent neural network Boltzmann machine AI systems in their infancy, and to placate the rising fears among humans of AI itself. Kev, I'm going to stop there and allow you guys to jump in. Then we're going to get into the spin of quantum particles.
Absolutely. And I'll bring Johnny in here as well, because like I was saying, Johnny, let's go to Mandela effect, because I think that's the kind of easiest or the best example of how we are being manipulated. And like I was saying to you, Jim Carrey, that's the latest kind of Mandela effect I've come across. And perhaps, Johnny, that might be part of the reason that Jim's having his little crisis right now and talking about how he no longer has an ID. He's no longer Jim Carrey. You know, something that we've disagreed on, I think, because I actually do remember Double R, John, and you're a single R man in his surname, right?
Yeah, it's always been single with me, Kev. I never ever saw it with 2 R's. But then again, it's weird that you seen 2. But the thing is, the 2 is at the exact same, because both of us think we're right. So
Exactly.
one of us are right, or the 2 of us is right, or none of us right. So it's actually Schrodinger's. It's Schrodinger's cat all over again, Kev, to be honest with you.
That's why, Johnny, I think we both kind of tell people never fall out over these conflicting memories, because it's part of a game. And as Tony's explaining here, we are being manipulated right down to our individual memories of things that we've held true to us all our lives. And I think Mandela, Tony, is the best kind of practical example to show people that this really is happening. Our brains are being changed.
Yes, they are. And I'm not going to repeat from the article some of the things we've presented before about the Mandela effect. I'm going to skip right to, if you want me to, right into the spin of the quantum particles.
Go for it.
Do that?
Go for it. Spin it.
Okay. Human brains operate similarly, but at significantly higher levels of complexity, as do adiabatic quantum computers. Nonetheless, builders of such devices counterfeit the tubulin dimers of the human brain, themselves being arranged in binary pairs of ones and zeros. There is reason to expect even these may be of a balanced ternary arrangement of -1, 0, and +1. Regardless, tubulin dimers composed themselves of quantum elementary particles moving in directions of spin or angular momentum. These are labeled as S, as 0, half, 1, 1, and 3, 2s, and 2 as partial integers. Okay? Particles of half integer spin, such as half, 3 over 2, and 5 over 2, are known as fermions. Those are the integer spins, such as 0, 1, and 2, are known as bosons. By changing the angular momentum or the spin of elementary particles comprising the tubulin dimers of the human brain, inherent information is thus modified. So when they're taking these half integer and integer spin particles, they're manipulating the fermions and the bosons. Those are all elementary particles that we've discussed related to CERN and particle physics and the particle colliders. This is what they're dealing with, is fermions and bosons. You've heard of the Higgs boson. So I'm just giving you some touch points. There are direct correlations between particle accelerators and colliders and how the D-wave computers were built. Direct correlation in quantum mechanics. All right, moving on. Calculations show that an adult differentiated pyramidal neuron in vivo taking place within a living organism has approximately 1.3 times 10 to the ninth tubulin dimers incorporated in a cytoskeletal or filaments and tubules of cytoplasm, microtubules that are 56 micrometers in length. Okay? This sets limitations on the number of quantum coherent neurons maintaining coherency for 25 microseconds for conscious events within pyramidal neurons. Now we're coming up on the break. Pyramidal neurons in the prefrontal cortex are implicated in cognitive ability. These cells play a critical role in complex object recognition within the visual processing areas of the cortex. What I'm saying here is that we have pyramidal neurons. These are tetrahedrons. Our neurons are constructed as tetrahedrons, and they function in the prefrontal cortex in our cognitive ability, our consciousness, our thought processes. So Kev, Johnny, go ahead. But they're the tetrahedrons again, arranging the neurons in a pyramidal structure.
Absolutely. And these tetrahedrons, they come up everywhere for a reason. And that's because our entire universe is built upon the tetrahedron. And when it comes to our brains, it's all about the geometry of how our neurons fire off. And that led to scientists saying that our brains work on a multi-dimensional level.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
There we go, and just like that, the three amigos were back. This is the Kev Baker Show. I am Kev Baker, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in tonight, right here on TFRLive.com, iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live. And remember, don't go anywhere after this show because the live radio continues. Our good friend, our sister Lucky, she will be live with Dr. Brooks Agnew on quantum connections right after the break. So please, please, please don't go anywhere. And tomorrow night, we've got a new guest coming to the show. Really excited about this one. I've heard this gentleman over on Clyde Lewis. Surprise, surprise, I listened to Clyde Lewis, but his name is David Oates. And he examines reverse speech. This will really literally blow your mind. We've all heard about these messages that are contained on some of the most famous kind of rock and pop tracks throughout history. Well, tomorrow night we'll be analysing the words and the true meaning of what some of the biggest politicians and people in the world are really saying. Really keen for that to come around. But tonight we're getting back into the mind hacking with Anthony Patch. You can find his work over at anthonypatch.com. Urge you all to check that out. Check out Entangled magazine as well. And I do believe, Tony, that the DVD version or access to watch the full spectrum dominance is on the way, right?
It is. Our good friend Robbie and Cheryl Spencer from SE Studios have been working diligently since the 16th and 17th of September when we did our live stream webinar, Full Spectrum Dominance, have been putting together the DVD version. And this is actually 4 DVDs over the course of 2 days. So they'll be broken out as day 1 and day 2. And this literally has taken them hours and hours and hours over the last couple of weeks to put this together, because they've done the editing, but they've also added in the graphics from the speaker notes. And what's important is that you're able to see the information that the speakers were presenting. And so they've done a fabulous job. That will be available at anthonypatch.com on Friday. So that's a 4 CD set from our very well-received conference. It was a grassroots, very budget-minded presentation. But as people have written to me and said, you know what's more important? It's the information, not the production value. So that's what we endeavored to do. I think we hit it out of the ballpark. I want to thank all of our speakers that were there, including yourself, Kev Baker. And I think we did a great job. It also included Clyde Lewis, whom you just mentioned, was one of our speakers. He rounded out the day on Saturday for us. And, you know, I tip my hat to Clyde Lewis, because he is the guy who first invited me into the public arena to speak about CERN. And that's where you and I met. So we'll go on from there if you like.
Absolutely, Tony. And, you know, again, big shout out to Clyde, because like ourselves here on TFR, he's not competing with anyone in this kind of genre. He's a team player. He's helped me personally, him and Ron Patton, so much behind the scenes. Some of the guests that we get, yourself included, thanks to Clyde Lewis. And I mean, think of that. Here's a network that you might think be a competitor, like you would see in the mainstream, everyone up against each other. But it truly is. We're all about the information. We all work together. Some things go on behind the scenes that we don't even talk about. But these guys, especially over at Ground Zero, they're exactly like us here. Real people, real radio, and not any nicer people could you meet. And Tony, that Saturday conference day, that was an absolute pleasure and a real highlight for me, getting to have a kind of on-camera conversation with Clyde. I was awestruck, I really was, because I've listened to the guy for so long. I really have. And, you know, you shouldn't idolize anyone, but when it comes to somebody who's been in the industry as long as he has doing this thing, I mean, obviously it'd be remiss, it'd be stupid not to look up to somebody like Clyde. And I had butterflies in my belly and everything, and everyone can check that out on the DVD. But again, let's get back into this, Tony, because there's so much to cover. Johnny's even got a story after we've done the mind hacking. Here we go, man.
Yeah, we're going to bring Johnny in here for sure. I also want to thank Sidney Burns, the engineer who started out the conference on Saturday, talking about the threat matrix. Did a beautiful job setting out the entire big picture of what was then presented by Alana Freeland on space fence. We had Dane Wigington on geoengineering. We had our frequent guest, David Heavener, speaking about the Hollywood aspects of what's going on in predictive programming and mind manipulation, propaganda, if you will. And then Clyde Lewis, who was talking about the occult aspects to the origins of technology. And then we went on from there. So let's get back to the article here that I composed. And I've tried to make this as simple as I can, taking their other terminology and putting it into my own words. Establishing how neurocircuit activation causes particular behaviors. And we're picking up from talking about the object recognition that has to do with the processing areas in the cortex. Establishing how neurocircuit activation causes particular behaviors requires modulating the activity of specific neurons. Magnetothermal genetic stimulation provides tetherless, okay, that's at a distance, obviously, provides tetherless deep brain activation sufficient to evoke motor behavior. The approach uses alternating magnetic fields to heat superparamagnetic, almost got the paramedic in there, superparamagnetic nanoparticles on the neuronal membrane. That is not moron that is neuronal membrane, folks. Neurons, heat sensitized by expressing TRPV1, are activated with magnetic field application. Magnetothermal genetic stimulation in the motor cortex evokes ambulation, that means moving. Deep brain stimulation in the striatum causes rotation around the body axis, and stimulation near the ridge between the ventral and dorsal stratum causes cessation of movement. So that's how they stop and start your body movements. This approach provides genetically and spatially targetable and repeatable areas of the brain to be influenced in this manner. The TRPV1 capsine receptor and the vanilloid receptor 1, referred herein as the transient receptor potentials chiation channel subfamily V, member 1, is a protein that in humans is encoded by the TRPV1 gene. This protein is a member of the TRPV group of transient receptor potential family of ion channels. Okay, those are the communication channels in our DNA. Okay, their function is the detection and regulation of body temperature. In addition, TRPV1 provides a sensation of scalding heat and pain known as nociception. Finally, researchers from the University of California, Riverside employ pulses of light and genetically modified nerve cells to reduce fear responses in test subjects. The achievement in fear reduction was accomplished by way of deleting memories, with attendant concurrent induction of entirely new thoughts. In totality, the use of DNA, including a third strand and their concomitant proteins and genes, targeted by magnetothermal stimulation of the motor and cerebral cortex, as well as the limbic system, not only controls bodily movements, but mind control itself, employing pulses of light and transmission of modulated 5G millimeter wave Wi-Fi signals within our newly immersive soup-like and terraformed environment. Each of us, all 7 billion plus presently, are targeted individuals within the Sentient World Simulation. Indeed, such terminology, unfortunately and quite literally, should become colloquial. So that's a lot. That's a mouthful. If you want to read that again in the extra details I have in that article, go to anthonypatch.com and subscribe to Entangled magazine. But this is the kind of depth that we get into in these magazines. Not just myself, but Kathleen Urquhart, Kev Baker, all of the people that provide deep research is what you're going to find in the Entangled magazine. It's a lot easier to read it than to listen to it on this show, but we want to put it out there to the audiences to say, look, we know what we're talking about. We're not talking about, how many shooters, how many bullets, where were they shooting from, or any of the other stuff. What I'm telling you here, folks, in this brain hacking article that I wrote and published on the October issue, October 1st, the day of the shooting, this same article was published for the first time, and I wrote it 2 months prior to the shooting. This is how they manipulated him. This is how mind control is done.
Absolutely, Tony.
So go ahead.
There's always going to be new information coming out from these universities as well. And I promise all the listeners out there that we will keep our finger very much on the pulse, and we'll try and keep you as up to date as the world of science is on this kind of topic. And a good place to start anytime you hear of any of these mass shootings or any of these events that turn into mass media circuses, always keep your mind open to the fact that mind control is very much in play. Can I say it happened in Vegas? I can't say definitively it did, but it's always a good default position to keep your mind open to that very real possibility. And now, Johnny, I want to come to you, brother, because we often talk about Michio Kaku being like the mainstream rock star guy of the American kind of science world. But over here, we've got our own rock star, literally. Brian Cox, he used to be in a pop band called D-Ream. Loved the band, but of course he's also a scientist. And now, John, he's like the face of science in the UK. He pushes all the kind of science. He's the guy that I need to cough when I say this word, BBC go to. And you've got an article from him, right?
Yeah, this is actually an article from that little BBC paedophile-loving hobbit, Brian Cox. Now, he said that uploading your brain onto a computer to achieve immortality could soon become a reality. In a new interview, Professor Brian Cox, he said that the technique known as technological singularity could be available sooner than you think. He said that he found no reason at all why human intelligence couldn't be simulated by computers, although he did not express a timeline for this. Now, he also spoke about the emerging of humans with machines. During the interview, he said that he found no reason at all why you cannot simulate human intelligence, adding that according to quantum physics, an area that he specialises in, true artificial intelligence is definitely possible. Technological singularity is a technique that experts believe could be used in the future to convert someone's mind into digital data and upload it onto an immensely powerful computer. And this would allow you to live in a world of unbound virtual experiences and effectively achieve immortality. Now, Kev, you've spoke about this umpteen times now. Do you know what I mean? Even the thought of this actually frightens me, that you could actually upload your brain and it will never ever be dead. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. And for him to come out with it now, Kev, he's pushing it.
Absolutely. And we've seen this coming from Hollywood as well, folks. There's a film called Transcendence with Johnny Depp. And in the real world, there's characters like Ray Kurzweil and other futurists that see this as the next natural progression, a way of almost cheating death. And I want to take it to Mr. Anthony Patch. He doesn't have professor in front of his name, but I think he's proven over the months and years he's been joining us that he is very, very knowledgeable on such things. And, you know, Tony, I suppose when you boil it down to our brain, we're just a kind of conglomeration of electrical signals and stuff like that. But does that mean we can literally upload ourselves to a computer, in your opinion?
I think memories can be. Memories actually reside within our DNA. That's our database. The computer between our ears is just the processor. You know, mainstream science will try to tell you that memories are in the brain. They're not. That's just the pathways of the information conducted by photons through the body from our DNA. Now, if you can want to split hairs and say that DNA makes up our brain and therefore it's comprised or stored in the brain itself, you can say that, but you have to be more definitive. And you have to go to the DNA itself that comprises the brain and the rest of the body. I think that memories can be digitized because it is binary and it is even ternary. When I refer to the pyramidal structure or arrangement of neurons, that's the way they want to put it out. The actual structure is a tetrahedron, which is the triangular-based shape that we always talk to and refer to. And that's proven in other areas outside of the arrangement of neurons. But that's to divert people from the truth to call them pyramidal. They are tetrahedronally arranged. The information is a ternary system. They will tell you it's binary, as I have, but it goes beyond binary when you look at the biological arrangement of the information in a three-numbered system that forms geometrically the arrangement of neurons and therefore the data. What I'm saying is you can take the digital information, -1, 0, and 1, as in the ternary system, which I have put out and said from the 10th model of the D wave to the 16th, they now have shifted from binary programming to ternary programming and processing of information. You can take the ternary information and you can arrange it geometrically in a tetrahedral fashion and then upload it into a computer, because the computer will process numbers. What do I mean by process? It will take those numbers, -1, 0, and 1, and it will arrange within the computer data bank that information into those tetrahedral arrangements that are a copy, a counterfeit at best, of the memory as it existed in the human brain. All you're doing is counterfeiting. That's a better way of describing uploading of memories. Consciousness, no. That's where the line is drawn. Consciousness will never be allowed by God to be uploaded into a machine. That's where the line is drawn.
Absolutely fantastic. And I was reading an article the other day, and with the new Blade Runner 2049 film that's coming out, it was all about synthetic humans. And they were talking about all the advancements we've made, and the issue of consciousness came up. And I had to laugh because they were talking about how they've got mathematicians now who have come up with formula, algorithms, and calculations to determine consciousness. Really? You can determine consciousness by a mathematical formula? And this is all them laying out a kind of story where they will say that very soon they have conscious AI, self-aware AI and stuff like this, because I think that spark within us, that consciousness we have, I think it boils down to a whole lot more than just a mathematical formula. I truly, truly do. And, Johnny, I'm coming back to you now, because imagine that, John, I had a kind of health scare recently, and that brings your mortality into focus. None of us are here forever. And imagine uploading ourselves to a computer, though, John. Maybe in 24th century, like Star Trek is based, maybe we'll still be broadcasting, albeit E-Johnny and E-Kev.
Well, could you imagine that, Kev? Do you imagine they were selling people's consciousness? Do you know what I mean? That you could actually jump into. I'll tell you what, if anybody jumps into mine, oh my God, they are in for a ride, because I have some of the stupidest thoughts that you have ever thought about that are in my head.
Johnny, I would absolutely love to have a Johnny bot on my phone. I could spend hours, absolutely hours, spend hours speaking to the electronic Johnny. I really could. But we mentioned DNA in there as well, and in the past we've mentioned Dr. Craig Venter, somebody at the forefront of synthetic biology. And one of his most famous presentations, I think we've helped to make it famous now, to be honest with you. I'm only joking, tongue-in-cheek. But he was talking to NASA, and he was talking about altering DNA of astronauts and things, Johnny. This has re-emerged now in the mainstream again, and you've got an article there putting forth that very idea, right? Altering the DNA of astronauts.
Yeah, that's right, because NASA, they're planning to send explorers to the Red Planet in 2030, and it's considering using drugs that alter the DNA code of its crews. Now, this could repair any damage sustained from high-energy particles that will bombard the bodies of, wait till you hear this, Marsonauts.
Martianauts.
Oh, God, I hope that doesn't become the buzzword. But it's given rise to greater risks of cancer and other diseases. Now, NASA Acting Chief Technologist Dr. Douglas Terrier made the comments ahead of an appearance at the Codex Innovation Summit held in London. One of the techniques currently under development that's following in its NMN, a compound expected to enter clinical trials after it was shown to rejuvenate elderly mice in laboratory tests. It's also considering making more advanced tweaks or alterations to the DNA of its astronauts, although the moral implications of such a radical step will need to be addressed. But Kev, now, this isn't NASA that's actually doing this. So is this like DARPA and places like that that's doing these kind of tests?
I would think it probably stems from people like Dr. George Church or the aforementioned Craig Venter. Anyone who hasn't checked out these characters really should. And Tony, I'll come to you. We've got a few moments left, but you know, it wasn't that long ago that NASA surprisingly admitted that we still haven't conquered the ability to go outside the Van Allen radiation belts. And I say that's surprising because they also claim they've been to the moon at one point. Now, if they could alter our DNA, that would negate all of this kind of effects that would happen with the cosmic radiation that's out there. But realistically, Tony, is this the way that they're looking to go for space travel?
No, Dr. Craig Venter said in that NASA Ames presentation that they could send the digitized DNA to a planet and reassemble it using a sequencer and basically a bio 3D printer on the planet that is sent by small spaceships to another planet, even to the stars, as he said. And you could grow your astronaut or your Martianaut on that planet or that star. So the genetic modification he did talk about, but it isn't necessary because they've already proven that they can digitize DNA and send the code through the cloud or send it to a planet. All you need is the amino acids, the basic building block materials of human DNA to then grow your astronauts on that planet. So this modification of astronaut DNA so that they can survive the high levels of radiation, like in the Van Allen radiation belt, isn't necessary. Just send the DNA basically through the cloud. Let's say this, Kev, it's DNA being transmitted not to the cloud, but to the ether.
Ah, the ether. And we're almost out of time again. I'm looking at the chat room over at tfrlive.com/chat. Dr. Brooks Agnew is in there. He is ready to go. Lucky will be with them after the break. They're going to be getting back into the Las Vegas shooter, a story that always seems to be changing. You know, the only thing I know about the Las Vegas shooter is that the official story absolutely stinks. So I urge everyone to stay tuned for that. Now, Tony, before we go, we've got another big show coming up on Friday, the 13th. It's the Anthony Patch Show. Any plans for that you can tease the listeners with? You're good at these promos.
Yeah, we'll talk about geomancy.
Geomancy. Absolutely fantastic. Now, to all the audience out there, again, I want to thank you so much for coming along on this journey for what has been 801 episodes. And I hopefully will be here for another 801 episodes and another 801 episodes. And together we will all grow. We'll all get that knowledge that will empower us. And like the theme tune says for hour number 2, hopefully that will bring the New World Order down. If there's anything you want to find out about that we've spoken about tonight, you can get in touch with myself or Anthony Patch through our websites. And again, I just thank you all, because without any of you listening out there'd be no point in us turning up. Tony probably dedicates about 24 hours of every day to researching this. I can hand on heart say that. And it is all for you out there. Stay tuned for Lucky and Doc Agnew after the break on Quantum Connections. And from me, Johnny and Anthony, please, 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 wherever you are, make it and keep it TFR.
And then he chucks that dial.
God bless you all. That pushed the trees into the power lines and triggered the fires. Now, that scenario pretty much what is being blamed or pinpointed for the cause of the fires, the etiology of the, or points of origin of the fires in Northern California, in addition to Santa Rosa. I'm going to wrap this up real quick. We will talk about the Oakland Hills firestorm, my personal account of that. But on another personal note, my own sister lives in Santa Rosa. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Pacific time yesterday, she and her husband were under mandatory evacuation. They left their home behind. They still don't know the if there's been any damage to her home. But I'm following this on a very personal level at this point. But there are no directed energy weapons. There's nothing nefarious other than the fact that it's very dry. Go ahead.
And Tony, you sent me a link to a video today from a gentleman that you've been following on YouTube. I believe he's a pilot, a very common sense report on everything that's going on. And if people want to write down this name, they can check out the channel. I'll spell it because I've been trying to say it to myself in my mind. Maybe Tony can pronounce it better, but the YouTuber is called Blanco Lirio, and it's BLANCOLIRIO, and that's BLANCOLIRIO. You can find him over at YouTube, and that was a really good report I watched from him. He was explaining the kind of visual stuff that he's seen going on, and he was explaining about these dry fronts as well. And I urge people to maybe check that channel out to get the latest and all the news coming from a citizen journalist, basically. But it's a very good channel, that one, Tony, and I definitely recommend people check it out.
Yeah, I followed his reports early this year. Back in January, we were covering the Oroville Dam and the flooding and the what appeared to be the imminent breaching of the dam. And he lives right there by Oroville Dam, and he was covering that literally from the face of the dam itself. Excellent professional reporting. So I followed him since then, and he does fly for the fire service, and he does the fire retardant dropping missions and water drop missions, and so he knows what's going on and gives a good firsthand report. And folks, the reason we're talking about some of these things is because we've been seeing the hurricanes. Obviously, we're also going to talk about the new MAD up into the hills on any of the rescue missions that we were tasked for. So only supervisory personnel in 3 ambulances. We spent nearly 20 continuous hours in the hills in Oakland. We were the only ones driving through the streets with fully involved houses on both sides of us. No firefighters were seen. No police officers were seen. Our job was to go up and respond to 911 calls for people who were trapped in their homes and had no way to get out. So we were taking ambulances up through the fire lines. Again, houses on both sides, completely involved in fire. And I don't say this to be sensational. I'm just telling you that I have firsthand experience. So I understand what's going on in Santa Rosa and the other areas. But we were taking people down out of the hills in our ambulances who were not patients. The firefighters were staged at the advancing line of the fire that was marching down through the hills of Berkeley and Oakland, heading towards Berkeley predominantly. The fire appeared that it was going to be unchecked, despite all the firefighters at the front line. Firefighters from all over the Bay Area. We had them lined up down Ashby Avenue for miles, bumper to bumper fire trucks staged. And our command post was at the Claremont Hotel in Berkeley, at the base of the fire line. The air tankers were flying at treetop level right over our heads and dropping water and retardant on the advancing line. The fire appeared that it was going to be unchecked, and it was going to repeat. I think it was in 1902. There was a fire in Berkeley that went all the way to the edge of the bay, all the way to the water line, and burned the city of Berkeley to the ground. This was the scenario we were anticipating. However, by about 3:30 in the afternoon, the prevailing winds, which at that point were blowing the fire down the hill towards the bay, they predictably did change. We weren't sure that the wind direction was going to change, but it did. And now the onshore breezes coming from the ocean, from the Pacific towards Berkeley, towards the hills, began to push the fire back upon its already burned out fuel sources. That's what turned it around. That's what saved Berkeley. It was not the efforts of the firefighters and the air tankers, because virtually they were in a no-win situation. This is what's known as an urban interface.
A lot to cover tonight, though, Tony. We're getting back into some of the current stuff that's going on in the world. And right now, it's been described as apocalyptic scenes that are coming out of California. We've got these fires that are raging. And this is where I want us to start tonight, because as you're going to go on to explain in a moment, I mean, you've had direct experience of this type of thing. And right now on the internet, there's a few conspiracy theories flying around as to the source of the problem when it comes to these fires. You sent me a video this morning. I checked that out. I got halfway through it, and the kind of, to break it down, I mean, I think there's people thinking that these fires may be the result of a directed energy weapon. And I would like to get your take on that, Tony. What do you think? I mean, is there some conspiracy here, or is this just something that happens?
The best way to answer that is to go and look at the evidence and check the facts. No directed energy weapons. Evidence doesn't support it. And my own personal hands-on experience in 1991, October 19th and 20th of October 1991, I was personally involved as a paramedic with American Medical Response, as a private paramedic, not as a firefighter, involved in the Oakland Hills firestorm. And we'll get into that a little bit, but I will tell you that from my personal experience in a firestorm, there are claims that the houses that are burned to the foundation, leaving foundations and chimneys and, stainless steel appliances, and that's it, are completely normal. There are no direct energy weapons involved here. And in fact, I'm going to give you the meteorological issue that has spurred the fires, in particular in the Santa Rosa, the Northern California area, not far from the Oregon border. What they had were 40-mile-an-hour winds that were knocking down power lines because the trees were being pushed into the power lines, and this is what triggered the fire. It's super dry, really low humidity, lots of fuel on the ground. The winds were caused because they had what is known as a dry front. This is a front without any moisture to it that was blowing through and mixed with a cold front that came down from the north, and in a circular fashion whipped up these 40-mile-an-hour winds. Fault line, 100-mile stretch of the fault line that coincides with the Mississippi River, and the fact that the Mississippi River in that area is virtually bone dry following this winter. During the spring and the summer, there was major flooding that really wasn't covered by the mainstream media, but major flooding throughout that area. So the river drying up is not because of drought conditions, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Go ahead, sir.
And Tony, you were mentioning there during your time as a paramedic, I mean, you've had first-hand experience of what this hell is actually like. And I use that word hell because some of the images that I'm seeing, I struggle to actually describe them, because I said apocalyptic at the start, and that's for lack of a better term. But what's it actually like when you're actually dealing with this stuff?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick visual. If you're driving through these fire lines, through the hills at night, and you look down into the canyons and the valleys where there used to be homes located amongst the trees in the folds of the hillsides, and all you see are glowing embers. It's like looking into the fireplace in your home when the logs have died down and they're just glowing embers. Everything else is black around it, and it is very surreal. Now, by way of giving you some of the background of my training, I went through the California State Fire Academy at Solano Community.
Mr. Patch, are you back with us, Tony?
I didn't know we lost you.
You're back. It's okay. We're back. It was just a slight interruption there. I thought we were getting our usual interruption that we usually have pre-show, but you're back with us live now. Carry on, brother.
Yeah, I went through the firefighter academy in California in the 80s and state certified as a firefighter 1. Never worked for a fire department. Didn't have a desire to. I did it for the cross training because I work with the firefighters so much. And because of that, when the Oakland Hills firestorm hit, I was a supervisor, a field supervisor, along with a number of other guys. And we decided, because we're not trained for this, we're not trained for a firestorm as paramedics. But fortunately, I had the firefighter background. We decided amongst ourselves that we were going to not allow any of our other crew members to go.
This is the Kev Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions, deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another live broadcast of the Kev Baker Show right here on Truth Frequency Radio Network. You can find us at tfrlive.com. And of course, we go out on iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live, wherever you're listening. I want to thank each and every one of you individually for turning up yet again. And I'm sure tonight is going to be yet another brilliant show, because for the past 3 or 4 weeks now, the shows have just been getting better and better. I don't know how we do it. We just throw it together, but somehow we just keep on raising the bar right here, and hope all of you out there are able to take the information that we're presenting, and it helps make things a little clearer as to what's going on in this crazy world. And as I've said right from the start, I don't tell you what to think. I just encourage you to think for yourselves. Don't accept what's coming from the mainstream, because we know they are liars. And tonight, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Mr. Anthony Patch. Johnny Whistles will be along in hour number 2. But for all you new listeners out there who don't know Mr. Patch, you can check out his work over at anthonypatch.com. He's got a number of books available there. You can get access to the Entangled magazine. You can also get access to the Full Spectrum Dominance Conference that we were a part of just recently. So without any further ado, let's waste no more time. Tony, how you doing, brother?
Very good, my friend. Thanks for having me back. And I don't think we'll be able to top Monday's show. What do you think?
I really, Monday's show was absolutely brilliant. And like I'd said at the introduction to that, you kind of teased us all on the Friday saying what was going to be coming up. And then Kathleen came in and she literally blew our minds. And I'm not just talking about me, because even the chat room were asking, how can you top Monday's show? We've got a